Welcome to today's live stream with me, Arnie Buss. Today, I am going to talk about questions. Now, if you're familiar with the simpatico approach to communication I talk about, you'll know that I tend to avoid questions. That is, at least if there's information that you're seeking, you are encouraged to turn it into what I call a gentle probe, which is a statement that sounds a little bit questioning, but isn't so entrapping. And don't forget that there's a wonderful opportunity that I'm offering to anybody who this might help. A free session with myself that lasts about 45 minutes where I can help identify issues in your relationship and help create a path forward where you can just kind of make things better. If you're like most relationships, there are things that can be improved. One bit of humor that I like, there's one day Billy comes home and says to his dad, "Dad, where do I come from?" And of course, the father thinks, okay, now it's time to have the talk about the birds and the bees. And so he sits Billy down and he explains to him about, and when a man and a woman love each other very much, and then kind of goes into all that. As he's explaining this to Billy, Billy's eyes get wider and wider. Oh my God. And finally the father finishes. And so, Billy, do you have any questions about this? Says, wow, this is a whole lot more complicated than Tommy. He said he comes from Cleveland, and where I come from is so much more involved. The lesson there is the question that Billy was asking, where do I come from, was interpreted by his father to mean one thing, whereas in fact he meant it to be another. Another amusing scene, for those of you who like the original Pink Panther movies with Peter Sellers, there's one scene where he wants to go inside of a door, and there's a man standing there and a dog that doesn't look terribly friendly. And he asks the man in an accent that I'm not going to try to reproduce. He says, "Does your dog bite?" And the man replies, "No, my dog does not bite." And so Inspector Clouseau takes a few steps forward, and then the dog just viciously attacks him and bites him. And finally, when he recovers, Clouseau says, "You said your dog didn't bite." And the man said, "That's not my dog." Again, so in both of these cases, what is it that kind of went wrong? The question that was asked, or at least as interpreted, was not the question, the intent of the question there. And now, in relationships, a lot of times questions can become very entrapping. A lot depends, of course, on how it is being asked. So you come home and your significant other says, "Hey, where have you been?" Or they say, "Where have you been?" Same words, slightly different intent of that. In the first case, all that's being asked is informational. And when it comes to purely informational questions, and even as far as the simpatico approach goes, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So it's like, another favorite of mine is a tourist in New York is trying to get to a concert, and wandering around, is a bit lost, and he comes across a street musician who's sitting there playing his heart out, and he says, "Excuse me, sir, how do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And the street musician looks at him and says, "Practice, practice, practice." So again, the question being asked and the question being responded to are a little bit different. So what is the simpatico solution to that? As you might guess, it is tracking. In other words, if you hear a question that seems ambiguous, that seems like it might be a little bit entrapping, like, where have you been? Before answering, track the intent of the question. If you track the intent of the question, then you'll be able to answer what the other person is really seeking. Many times it's not contained in the words itself, or the wording of the question, as you've seen in several examples, does not necessarily convey what information is really being after here. So in the first case, so Billy says, where do I come from? Again, you might say, oh, Billy, what now you have to be careful. Now you could ask him a question, Billy, why are you asking? We turn that into a gentle probe. So Billy, there's a reason you're asking. And then Billy might say, well, my friend Tommy said he's from Cleveland, and I wonder, he comes from Cleveland, and I'd like to know where I come from. Or in the case, now it would have ruined the humorous bit, but in the case of the Inspector Clouseau asking about if his dog bites, then it's not quite as funny, of course, but the man responding could have said, perhaps you're asking about this dog. Because when he said, does your dog, that seemed to imply that Clouseau thought that the dog that was right by the man was his, which is a natural assumption to make. The other thing is that now when there's a purely informational question, like where have you been, for example? I mean, that seems purely informational. You just tell him. Or it's like, in the case of Carnegie Hall, it might be, you have a reason for asking. And you say, yes, there's a concert I'd like to get to. Then again, it's not quite so funny, but then you could say, oh, you go down here and make a left, and 2 blocks down, and it's right there. Of course, it depends on what your objective is. If your objective is to help the person who's seeking information, then tracking the intent of the question when it seems ambiguous is an effective way to go. And of course, if you want to have something that's funnier, then of course a lot of humor involves miscommunication, as in all of these examples. Now, what if it does sound entrapping? Where have you been? Now, the thing about that is, let's unravel that a bit. So maybe you were expecting, an earlier return, or maybe you're concerned about where that might have been. Again, before answering a question that has that kind of charge to it, be sure to track the intent of the question. Now, this leads to flipping things around the other way, which is when you're asking a question, when you're seeking information, before asking the question, communicate the intent of the question, communicate what it is you're about. So, for example, the tourist, instead of saying, how do I get to Carnegie Hall, might say, excuse me, I'm trying to get to a concert at Carnegie Hall. Can you tell me how to get there? And then, of course, again, not as funny, but more informational. That gives the person answering the information that they need to answer the real question. So Clouseau might have said, excuse me, do you know if this dog bites? Instead of saying your dog, because, so does this dog bite? And the man might say, well, I don't know, it's not my dog. And so that would be useful information. Or it might say, well, it's my neighbor's dog, and I know that he does bite, so be careful. Now, if little Billy had skills, then he might say, excuse me, Dad, my friend Tommy says he comes from Cleveland, and I'd like to know where I come from. So you see, whether you are responding to a question, first track the intent of the question. Again, if it's something which is either ambiguous or charged, or if you're asking a question where there might be some ambiguity, and when in doubt, always clarify. Speak to what the intent of the question is before you ask it, so that the other person has the information that they need to know in order to answer it effectively. And when you hear something that's entrapping, of course, you want to track that. Now, this is, of course, in an interpersonal situation. If you're on the witness stand under oath and you're asked a question by an attorney who's trying to, interrogate you, then it's, especially if there's a judge who's kind of looking on very carefully to make sure that your job as a witness is to answer the question being asked. And there, of course, the best advice is to simply answer the question being asked and no more. We've seen some examples in the news recently where a witness, in response to questions, just seems to kind of go off the rails a bit and gets admonished. And ultimately, that's an indication that you're really trying to dodge something. So again, if you're on the witness stand under oath, answer the question. The thing is that if you're in a relationship with somebody, then they're not a prosecuting attorney doing a cross-examination. They're not a judge. Hopefully you are in an egalitarian relationship. And if there's something that they're upset about, then it's important to track what that upset might be. And if you hear a question with a charge, or if you're a question that seems like it's an interrogation, then again, don't take it personally. Track the intent of the question, and then you'll be able to answer what is really going on. Because in the case of where have you been, they're not seeking information about where you've been. They're in a way that they can't, for whatever reason, express in the moment. They're expressing some angst about that. What might that be? We don't know if all we hear is the question. And if you try to answer the question as it is in that case, then it is guaranteed to go off the rails. So what could be behind it? Well, I mean, it might be that they were that you're late. So is it that you were late, and were they concerned? Were they expecting you for dinner, and the dinner got cold and they're mad about that? Again, are they worried? Are they afraid? Are they sad? You simply don't know. If the person asking in that situation, again, if they had skills, if they were doing it skillfully, even if they have skills, we don't always, we aren't always skillful 24/7, even if we know the skills. If they were being mindful in that situation, they might say, it's a lot later than I was told, and I'm concerned that maybe something had happened. And then we could move to an a mini impact statement. In the future, I'd like to be given a call whenever there's going to be late like that. Or maybe they were concerned about where you were. So were you having a drink with the boys again and after work, the way we talked about you weren't going to be doing? Again, instead of trying to interrogate, you might say, it was discussed that there wouldn't be drinking after work, and then I'm concerned that that might be happening again. I'd like to talk about how, I'd like to revisit that and sort of see what's going on. Again, many times we think that we need to kind of come at the other person with energy in order to get our needs met. But as we talked about last time, and I've talked about before, impact statements are a much more effective way to get your whatever need is going on with that. And you typically have to, it's most effective when you couple that with tracking. But again, today we're talking about questions. And again, when you hear a question that is ambiguous or entrapping, track the intent of the question. When you're asking a question, be sure to first signal what the intent of the question is first, so that even if the other person doesn't have the skills of tracking, they would be able to answer your question in a way which is more effective. And again, of course, if you're on the witness stand, then you have to answer the questions. So these nuances about just even something as simple as questions are something which can cause a lot of issues in a relationship that can kind of build up. So just even that one little scene, say, where the person comes home, the one at home is upset, and they come out, where have you been? And then they, well, it's none of your business. You're not the boss of me. Back and forth, and that can just lead to more conflict. And it may be one little thing, but when you have many of these little things over time, they can be like 1,000 paper cuts, and these 1,000 paper cuts can really harm a relationship. They can take you from being just loving and heart-centered with each other into a situation where it's like, my partner's always they're always on my case. I can't. It's like they're always giving me a hard time. Or on the other hand, they act like they're single all the time, and they never tell me what where they are, where they're going, and I'm left here like this. And it doesn't have to be that way. And if it's gotten to that point with you, then I encourage you to schedule a free session with me. I mean, I'd be happy to just sort of talk to you about what is going on in your relationship. I talk a lot about communication here, but that's only one very important aspect. But I cover all aspects of relationships, all dimensions, because relationships are a multifaceted thing, and that they involve just so many complicated issues, that they involve our own personal history, our own stuff, as well as the other person. They involve how we were with our parents. They involve our upbringing. They involve us kind of working through our own stuff. And then here's this other person, and then it just kind of multiplies. So relationships can be complex. They're, no matter how challenging they are, my experience is that with heart-centered communication, it just makes all the difference in the world. So again, I look forward to maybe seeing you on one of my sessions. There's a link that you can click on and select a time, and I'd be happy to talk to you then. And until then, stay in your aware heart.